أمير المؤمنين Oh Ali, bury me at night, as these so-called companions of my father brought me so much pain. Indeed, they brought you so much pain. Imam Al says 60 different men beat Fattima Al Zahraa as entering the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen. تقل ابويا ابويا امر على عبد ضربني.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: وضرب الله مثلا للذين آمنوا امرأة فرعون إذ قالت رب ابن لي عندك بيتا في الجنة ونجني من فرعون وعمله ونجني من القوم الظالمين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. My dear brothers and sisters, my dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We dedicate these several nights, these few nights, in her memory, to remember her role, her achievements, what Sayyidat al-Nisa stood for, what she lived for, what she died for. Sayyidat al-Nisa, Fattima Al Zahraa, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, was not an ordinary woman. By far, she surpassed the woman of her time. In fact, she surpassed all the women in history. That is why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi gave her the title of Sayyidati Nisa'il Alameen, which means the mistress, so to speak, of all of the women throughout history. This was Fattima Al Zahraa, salawatullahi wa salamu alayha. As we approach the 13th of Jamad al-Ula, which marks one of the days that could possibly be her martyrdom. Of course, we have 3 narrations suggesting the day of her martyrdom and her death. We have one narration suggesting that Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen died 40 days after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. We have another narration suggesting that she died 75 days after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, and this is the narration that is coming up on the 13th of Jamad al-Ula. And we have a narration that states she died 95 days. Her martyrdom was 95 days after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Thus, we dedicate the next few nights in the memory of Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam. Why commemorate Fatimiyya? There are some today who disagree and say that this event should not be commemorated. It should not be celebrated. In fact, it should pass without notice. We, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, should not create commotion and should not advertise and should not publicly celebrate this event. Why? Because after all, this is a historic event. The death of Fattima Al Zahraa. How did she die? Did she die a normal death? Or was she murdered? This is a historic issue. Historians have disagreed. Some say that she died a normal death. Others say that she was murdered. Why bring up historic events? Especially historic events that most likely, in fact, most definitely, can create division. Some say, why mention these events? Doesn't it cause division and problems among the Muslim nation? Doesn't it divide Muslims? Some ask this question. And some today, followers of Ahlul Bayt, there are some that choose to ignore the issue of Fatimiyya and not mention it at their Islamic centers and at their mosques. And if it is mentioned very subtly, as if it's a local event, something that happened locally, and it is mentioned very, very briefly. And if Fattima Al Zahraa is mentioned, nothing about her death is mentioned, only about her life. But how did she die? What were the possible reasons? What was the background story? What were the events that occurred right before her death? There are some followers of Ahlul Bayt that choose to leave these details out on purpose, not out of ignorance, because they know very well what took place, but they feel that in order to unify with the other Muslims, that the issue of Fatimiyya should be neglected. There are some that even say there are lots of great figures in history. In Islam, there are tens of Islamic figures, maybe hundreds of figures, historic figures. Out of all of these figures, from all of the Sahaba, these great men, from their wives, from so many figures, why do you emphasize on Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam? There are some that ask this. Why? In Islamic history there's no other figures? But why the emphasis on Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam? There were other great women. Some will mention, for example, some of the wives of Rasulullah. And others and others. Why not talk about them? Why not celebrate their lives? Why celebrate the life of Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam? These are questions that pose in the minds and hearts of some. Some have made them very apparent and have discussed these points publicly. Others might not have discussed these points, but it might have crossed their minds. Thus, in these couple of nights, we'd like to discuss these questions and provide convincing answers as to why we commemorate Fatimiyya. Why is it essential for us to commemorate Fatimiyya? In fact, we believe that commemorating Fatimiyya is one of the essential factors that has kept the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt alive. It was because of this event, the commemoration of Fatimiyya. These are the questions that we shall touch upon tonight and then in the next couple of nights. First of all, my dear friends, this might have been a historic event, yes, but every nation must know its history. A nation that does not know its history is a dead nation. A nation that does not recognize its history and doesn't recognize its historical figures, this nation is a dead nation. This nation is a nation without pride. without honor, without self-consciousness. That is why you see that most nations, they take pride in their history, even if it's a very humble history. For example, the United Arab Emirates. This was a country founded not too long ago. Its history is very humble. It's very simple. Yet you will see that they take pride in their history. They take pride in their leaders. They consider them heroes, even though it's a very simple history. Another example, one of the countries that I visited, Singapore. Singapore is a beautiful island, it's a beautiful country, but it's very small. It's probably smaller than the size of a big city in the top countries. It's definitely smaller than a city like London or Los Angeles. But this small country, it's considered a country, but it's like a city. They seek pride in their history. They have a history museum. You walk for several hours and you learn about their history, even though it's simple. It's very humble, yet they take pride. In the United States of America, how much do they emphasize on their history? How much do they emphasize on, for example, Christopher Columbus, who discovered America? How much do they emphasize on the founding fathers of the United States of America? Men like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and so on and so forth, whom are considered the founding fathers and those who wrote the Constitution. In fact, every student that graduates from public schools in America has to study American history, has to study the biographies of these heroic American figures, because they're symbolic. Any nation must know its history. Nations seek pride in their history. But unfortunately, when we come to Muslims, we see that some, they neglect their history. They say, مَا لَنَا وَالسَّلَاطِينَ. They say we should not get involved in history and historic events. What happened, for example, between Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib and Muawiyah? There are some that say we should not get involved. They were both righteous men and they fought a battle, but we don't know at the end of the day who was right, who was wrong. We should not get involved. There are some who have such a passive attitude towards history. When you ask them what happened in Karbala, they say, مَا لَنَا وَالسَّلَاطِينَ. We should not get involved into political history. What happened in Karbala, we don't know. There are some that even say that Sayyiduna Yazid قتل Sayyiduna al-Hussein. Our master Yazid killed our master Hussein. This is having a passive attitude towards history. When you neglect your history, this is what happens. Both of them become your masters. The good and the bad and the evil, they both become your masters. You ask some Muslims, where's the grave of Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam? In Medina, those who go for pilgrimage, you visit the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. There's two men lying next to him. Their graves are well known, Abu Bakr and Umar. You go in Baqi', the four great Imams of Ahlul Bayt are buried. The wives of Rasulullah, their graves are known. Ibrahim, the son of Rasulullah, the uncles of Rasulullah, Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Al-Abbas, the uncle of Rasulullah, all of their graves are well known. Even Uthman, his grave is at the end of Baqi'. But where's the grave of Fattima Al Zahraa? Ask the Muslims, the 2 million Muslims that attend and go to pilgrimage and perform Hajj, ask them, where is the grave of Fattima Al Zahraa? They say, we don't know. Why don't you know? This is Fattima Al Zahraa, the daughter of Rasulullah. According to some historians, the only daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Fattima Al Zahraa, the only daughter of Rasulullah, yet they don't know where her grave is. And why is it hidden? They don't know. Why isn't her grave unapparent? No one knows. Because this nation, this ummah, has neglected its history. It's neglected its historic figures. Our heroes and heroines have been neglected. According to one scholar, he said that some nation, they turn their dwarfs into giants, and we the Muslims, we turn our giants into dwarfs. Read about the histories of certain nations. You see that a simple figure, sometimes uneducated, sometimes very immoral, a very simple figure who led a war or a battle. He's a dwarf, not by height, but by his achievements. He's a dwarf, yet his nation turns him into a giant. Yet our nation, who has giants, not by their height, but by their achievements and contributions, like Ali ibn Abi Talib, like Fattima Al Zahraa, like Ja'far al-Tayyar, like Al-Hamza, the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, like Abu Talib. These are giants. They're made into dwarfs. A man like Abu Talib is considered a mushrik by some ignorant Muslims. Abu Talib, the one who stood side by side with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but in secret, who defended Rasulullah throughout his days in Medina, they say that he died a mushrik. While Abu Sufyan, who spent his entire life fighting Rasulullah, who spent 23 years fighting Rasulullah from the day that Rasulullah declared his prophecy or his prophethood until the conquest of Mecca, Abu Sufyan spent all these years fighting Rasulullah. Yet Abu Sufyan is considered a hero. Thus, this is a nation that turns its giants into dwarfs. Any nation that wants to progress and grow needs to know its history, my dear friends. Shouldn't say that this is mere history and that it should be avoided and that it creates controversy and it creates divisions amongst us. Thus, it should be avoided. Absolutely not. We should embrace our history. We should understand our history. We should understand and study and examine the details of our history. What happened? What were the mistakes that took place in our history? You see, there are laws to history. Sometimes history repeats itself. Sometimes history repeats itself. The same way that we have laws of physics, we have the laws of history. The Quran is full of laws of history. That there are some things that reoccur. There are some issues that reoccur. For example, victory. There are reasons for victory in history. If those reasons occur once again, if those ingredients for victory are provided, victory will come. If those ingredients are not provided, there'll be failure. There are laws of history. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, سُنَّةَ مَنْ أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ قَبْلِكَ مِنْ رَسُولٍ وَلَنْ تَجْدَ لِسُنَّتِنَا تَبْدِيلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sunan, has traditions, historical traditions in history they could repeat. We should at least study our history so that certain mistakes that were committed in our history are not committed again. In order to build and improve our future, we need to understand very carefully our past. Our past, knowing the weaknesses of the past, can improve our future and make it stronger. This is one reason why we should understand Fatimiyya, because the martyrdom of Fattima Al Zahraa was a very important historical event. Furthermore, when we celebrate the life of Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam, we are not celebrating the life of an ordinary person. Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam was not an ordinary person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentions the wife of Fir'aun, and he says that the wife of Fir'aun is an example, is an exemplary figure for all believers, men and women. وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا امْرَأَةَ فِرْعَوْنَ. And Allah has set an example for those who believe. Women? No. Men? No. In general, all those who believe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set an example for them. Whom? وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا امْرَأَةَ فِرْعَوْنَ. The wife of a Pharaoh, or the wife of the Pharaoh, Asiya bint Muzahim. This lady, this great lady that was not affected by the wealth and power and tyranny of her husband. Rather, she had interest in what Allah has, not what her husband has. إذ قالت رب ابن لي عندك بيتا في الجنة. Who said, "Oh Allah, build me a house, not here on earth. I don't want the house of Fir'aun, but I want a house in paradise, in Jannah. وَنَجِّنِي مِنْ فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ. And rescue me from Fir'aun and his actions." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets for us examples. Asiya bint Muzahim is an example. Now imagine Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam, who was greater than Asiya bint Muzahim. When we study the life of Fattima Al Zahraa, we see that her entire life was exemplary. It was full of lessons. Should we not learn from the life of Fatima? We live at a time, my dear friends, that we're in need of role models. Our teens, our youth are in need of role models. Our teens, unfortunately, today are obsessed with entertainers, with celebrities, with singers, actors. Absolutely. They know their names, their full names, their birthdays. They've seen a bunch of pictures. They post pictures on their walls, on their social networking sites. These entertainers and actors have become role models for our youth. And what are they learning? What are these entertainers teaching our youth? What do these entertainers have to offer other than drinking, getting drunk, driving under the influence of alcohol, going to jail several times? Living a life of immorality, and some of them even commit suicide. Are these role models? We need to provide real, genuine role models for our youth. Those whom they can connect to, those whom they can look up to, those who they can look at and say, this is who I want to be. This is who I aspire to be like Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam, like Ali ibn Abi Talib, like Imam Al Sadiq, like Salman Al Farisi, like Abu Dhar. These are the figures. Of course, these are the Ahlul Bayt and these are their students. But even though these students, their students, they had amazing students. Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam was a role model. She was a daughter, a wife, and a mother. As for being a daughter, she was the best daughter that a father can have. The best daughter possible. To the point that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, at times of distress, at times of agony, when he felt down, when he wanted support, even though he had plenty of wives, yet he would come to the house of Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam. Perhaps at other homes, at the homes of his wives, he would not find comfort, but at the house of Fatima he would find comfort. And Fattima Al Zahraa would take care of her father, not like a daughter, but like a mother. She would take care of him like a mother. And subhanallah, it was both of them, both Fattima Al Zahraa and Rasulullah, it was their fate for both of them to be orphans. Both of them were orphans. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was only 6 years old when his mother Amina bint Wahab died in the middle of the desert. And Fattima Al Zahraa was a child when her mother Khadija bint Khuwaylid died. They were both orphans. Thus, Rasulullah felt the pain of Fatima, and Fattima Al Zahraa also felt the pain of Rasulullah, because they both had experienced being an orphan. Yet subhanallah, even though Rasulullah had lost a mother as a child, Allah gave him another mother, but when he was older. He gave him the support of a mother, the love of a mother, the caring and the compassion of a mother, and that was Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would describe Fattima Al Zahraa as his mother. He would say, Fatima to Ummu Abiha. Fatima is the mother of her father. She sets an example of how a daughter and son should behave towards their parents. Fattima Al Zahraa was a wife. She was a wife to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. The best wife that a husband can have was Fattima Al Zahraa. And at the same time, the best husband that a wife can have was Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. They were perfect for one another. That is why Amir al-Mu'mineen was genuinely in love with Fattima Al Zahraa. He loved her. That is why, as long as Fattima Al Zahraa was alive, Amir al-Mu'mineen did not remarry. He didn't marry any other wife. Yes, after her death, Amir al-Mu'mineen remarried. He married maybe 2 other wives. But not while she was alive, out of love and courtesy and loyalty to Fattima Al Zahraa. The same way that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when Khadija was alive, he didn't marry another wife. It was after the death of Khadija that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam remarried. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says that I would sometimes come back home. I would come back home from a hard day, a difficult day. My body is aching. I'm under anguish and stress. Amir al-Mu'mineen would come back home from a very difficult day he would come back home to his wife Fattima Al Zahraa, he would say, as soon as I see the face of Fatima, I would forget all of my agonies, all of my problems, all of my troubles. They would be forgotten as soon as I look at the face of Fattima Al Zahraa. She would make me forget everything. I say, subhanAllah, today we hear so many complaints from married couples. I've heard a comment by one husband that is completely the opposite of what Amir al-Mu'mineen says. I heard one husband that says, when I look at the face of my wife, I remember all of my troubles and problems and agonies and misery. When I'm away from home, I forget these problems. As soon as I see her face, I remember all of my problems. This is not a real marriage. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, I would forget all of my problems when I see Fatima, because Fatima is an exemplary wife. She knew how to take care of her husband. She knew how to satisfy her husband, Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Amir al-Mu'mineen knew how to satisfy his wife, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. They supported one another. Fatima was the backbone for Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Amir al-Mu'mineen was the backbone for Fatima. Fatima Al Zahraa would take off the burdens and troubles and problems off the chest of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Historians say that never was it recorded that Amir al-Mu'mineen and Fatima ever engaged in a quarrel or an argument or a fight. Or did Fattima Al Zahraa ever complain about Amir al-Mu'mineen to Rasulullah or to any of the women? Nor did Amir al-Mu'mineen ever complain about Fattima Al Zahraa to Rasulullah or anyone else. Never. They were perfectly happy with one another, and they divided the responsibilities at home. While Amir al-Mu'mineen had his responsibilities, Fattima Al Zahraa had her own responsibilities. They would help one another. They would support one another. This is an ideal house. This is an ideal home. This is an ideal family. This is not in a Disney movie or in Hollywood, but this is a genuine family that existed. And this should be the role model for all families. And finally, Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam was a mother, and the best mother that any child can have. Fattima Al Zahraa was a kind, loving, caring mother, but at the same time she was a teacher. At the same time she would teach by example. When the Ahlul Bayt fasted for 3 days because they performed a nadr or a nadr, when Al-Hasan and Hussein alayhim as-salam were ill, they performed a nadr to fast. They fasted for 3 days. 3 consecutive days, a poor person would come and ask for food. Fattima Al Zahraa would take the bread and give it to the poor person. Isn't this teaching by example? Offering what she had, the best of what she had. She offered by example. She led by example, and she taught by example. Imam Al-Hasan Mushtaba alayhi salam says, one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw Fattima Al Zahraa, my mother, standing in her mihrab, praying, worshipping, crying, praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeking forgiveness for others. Praying for others, but she didn't pray for herself. He said, when she finished her salah, I said, my dear mother Fatima, you prayed for everyone, but not for you, not for yourself. She said, Ya bunay, al-jar thumma ad-dar. My dear son, first let's think of our neighbors, then of ourselves. My dear brothers and sisters, as we reach the conclusion of our session tonight, stay with us in the next 2 nights as we continue through this journey, as we talk about the life of Fattima Al Zahraa alayhi salam. So continue with us in the next coming nights. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
As her will to Amir al-Mu'mineen, O Ali, bury me at night, as these so-called companions of my father brought me so much pain. Indeed, they brought you so much pain. Imam al-Sadiq says 60 different men beat Fattima Al Zahraa as entering the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen. تقل ابويا